Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Few industries are at the mercy of more factors out of its control than agriculture. There's the weather, ranging from drought to flood, pests like locusts and mice plagues, and then all the red tape and unexpected hiccups involved in exporting products to the rest of the world. Add in COVID, closed borders and a lack of seasonal workers, and the challenges are more than a little daunting. Fortunately, GrainCorp, with more than 100 years' experience in Australian agribusiness, is forecasting a good harvest amid strong demand for Aussie grain. Robert Spurway is Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of GrainCorp. Robert, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you. Nice to join you today.
You're going to have to give me a bit of a 101. This is not an area I know a lot about. So, first off, what's this year's crop looking like?
This year's crop's shaping up to be another excellent crop, well above average. In fact, ABARES, the Bureau of Agricultural Statistics, in early September released their update suggesting that it would be 26.5 million tonnes of grains on the east coast. To put that in perspective, the average is about less than 20, and last year the bumper crop was just under 30 million tonnes. So really looking forward to an excellent crop ahead and a great opportunity, not just for GrainCorp, but for the whole of the sector.
Okay, so when's harvesting time?
In fact, harvest has already started. So in mid-September, it gets underway for the winter crops in Queensland. Then it rolls south over the course of the next 2 or 3 months and completes by late December or early January. We're really into full harvest by the end of November.
Okay, and what are the different types of grains that we're talking about?
The grains that we handle are principally wheat, barley and canola seed. Canola seed's an oil seed made for manufacturing oils and margarines and products like that.
Yep.
There are also a number of other crops made at different times of the year, but wheat, barley and canola seed are the principal ones.
Okay, and what are the prices like for wheat, barley and canola?
Well, that's a really good question, and we've seen a sustained rally in crop values over the last 12 months. That's built from demand around the globe, and take canola, for example, that's come up at prices in the order of $900 a tonne. So really record highs that we're seeing for most grain. The other side of that, though, is despite those relatively high prices, Australian grain is competitive in nearly every market around the globe. So great opportunity to move grain from Australia to markets around the world.
Yes, I was wondering that. So how big a player is Australia in those markets, wheat, barley, canola? We know lots about barley because of China banning Australian barley last year, but how big a player are we and who are the big competitors?
We're playing a bigger part this year because of the bumper crops that we're seeing in Australia and our focus on export. But traditionally, the big export markets are the US and Canada, the Black Sea area, sometimes also out of Russia and areas like Brazil. So Australia is a significant player on the global market, but we are recovering from 3 pretty tough years of drought in Australia. And it's good this last year and the coming year to have plenty of grain to meet the demand around the world.
Yeah, and some of those competitors, I'm thinking of Brazil, has had a dreadful season, from what I've read at least. Therefore, there should be plenty of demand at a time when we have lots of grain and prices are high.
You've absolutely summed it up perfectly. It's been a fantastic year for GrainCorp and for the industry generally. And that's not just off the big crop here and the strong performance of our business. There's been drought and dry conditions in the Northern Hemisphere, not just in Brazil, but particularly across North America and Canada. There's some supply restrictions coming out of Russia and the Black Sea. So that drives a tremendous opportunity for Australian grain to find homes around the world at good values.
Yeah, that's great. I mentioned a moment ago the ban on barley from China. Has that had much of an impact?
We've seen plenty of competition for grain around the world. So what I mean by that is there's a greater demand for grain than there is for supply generally. So whilst there hasn't been many barley exports to China, we've found homes in other markets where there's additional demand.
Okay. Now, one of the big issues that we keep hearing from state premiers is the whole idea of seasonal workers moving around the place. Now, you've just described a sort of like a sweeping motion almost of the harvest season where it starts in Queensland and heads south. What about seasonal workers? And they do play a big role in the industry. How difficult is it to get them across borders? Are there enough people to do the work?
There are enough people, but it is certainly a challenge. Labour supply across the agricultural industry generally has been tight, and it's been even more restricted by the closed international borders. Whilst agricultural workers and essential workers can move across state borders, they do want the certainty of being able to return home if they need to. So certainly those closed borders have been a challenge. At GrainCorp, we've got a good reputation amongst the people that work with us. And in fact, 75% of our 2020 harvest casual workforce, when surveyed, said they plan to return to us this year. So we're doing well, and we're looking forward to welcoming those people back and some new locals, but certainly would like to see restrictions eased because I think it helps regional economies generally, as well as labour supply for the agricultural sector.
This is probably a very silly question, Robert. Are you an essential service?
GrainCorp is an essential service, and
Right.
at our heart, we're a food company. So keeping not just Australia, but the world fed is very much an essential part of the economy.
Okay. Stay with me, Robert. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Robert Spurway, CEO and Managing Director of GrainCorp. BHP recently moved sort of from hard commodities, and it's getting itself out of, well, it's not getting itself out of oil and gas, but it's de-emphasising that, pushing into potash, which is obviously an agricultural commodity. That whole agricultural community and global agricultural community, we used to talk about it all the time, not so much in recent decades because Australia sort of has moved on. But it seems with growth in the global population and when you've got players like BHP really moving into that sector big time, there's obviously a lot of potential for agriculture more generally.
That's right. I've been in food all of my career, and I started in food because I had the belief that people always needed to eat. And that certainly holds true at the moment. We've seen the tremendous resilience of the food sector through the pandemic, and indeed the growing world population and that demand for food. It's also a tough industry, though. You mentioned earlier the droughts and other factors that farmers and the ag sector generally face. It speaks to the resilience, I think, of the sector. And in our business, we're also diversifying to make sure that we're more resilient through the cycle, reducing the volatility of our earnings, making the most of the bumper harvest when they're there, but also exploring new, innovative and sustainable areas like plant-based proteins and other income streams that will grow our business in a more sustainable way.
So that brings us to GrainCorp itself. It's more than a century old. It started as a New South Wales government-owned handler of grain. You're now listed on the ASX. Obviously, you will handle grain, and you talked about wheat, barley and canola. But what you're talking about now, is the future to become more diversified, to do more than what you traditionally have done?
Yes, it is, in a word. I think if you draw on our history, as you say, it goes back over 100 years, starting with one silo in 1916 in central New South Wales. That followed some port construction over the next decade or two.
Right.
We now have 160 regional receiving sites for grain. We've got 7 ports across the east coast of Australia. As you said, we listed on the Australian Stock Exchange back in 1998 it was. So I think that rich history gives us confidence to look to the future and focus on what we do well, but also use that platform to bring the innovation and the thinking that's been such a big part of the agricultural sector generally over the last 100 years. So that does take us to diversifying into areas like alternative and plant-based proteins. We recently partnered with CSIRO and others in the future feed business, which brings an innovative additive to animal feed that can reduce methane emissions and increase productivity. So plenty of areas that we're looking to that not only draw on our history, but support with confidence our growth into the future.
Now, coming back to the idea of droughts and floods and mice plagues and things like that, how do farmers forecast? How does GrainCorp forecast? It must be an incredibly challenging role, given you are at the mercy of those things.
Yes, it can be difficult to forecast, and farmers, more than any sector, are reliant on the weather. And we all know the weather forecast can be accurate, but the long-term weather forecasts are a lot more difficult. They've certainly improved in recent decades. So we have a lot of confidence about some of the metrics like soil moisture levels and the outlook for weather in the near term. But forecasting over the longer term is more difficult. The macro trends remain very positive. Demand is outstripping supply, so it's a great place to be. We're diversifying our business and looking for other areas where we can add value to the crops that we process. And also, we have an innovative crop production contract or insurance scheme
Yeah.
that smooths our earnings by making sure that we get a payment in drought years. And then in the bumper years, we pay that value back to the insurer. So, very innovative and quite unique product that supports GrainCorp, helps with sustainable decision making over time, and makes us a far less volatile business into the future. And I think you see some of those sorts of things, maybe not the insurance product, but diversification on farm, minimising the impact of perhaps inaccurate forecasts.
Yeah, I mean, what I love about farmers, you think of a farmer on a tractor, right? So I grew up in central west New South Wales. The guys out further west who are basically school friends of mine who have gone into that industry, it amazes. They sit on a tractor, but the tractor is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. They listen to the ABC all day, worried about currency and worried about global demand for grains and all sorts of things. It's quite a sophisticated industry. The farmer on the tractor is not what it's about.
Very sophisticated, and terms like precision agriculture, the use of global positioning satellite technology for that tractor and the farmer, but also connectivity. And GrainCorp uses a product that we created called Crop Connect. And that's another technology solution that allows farmers to, on their smartphone, have a look at what their crop is worth. It opens them up to a marketplace and means that they can transact grain with us and with other customers, as you say, sitting in the tractor or in their truck bringing the grain to our sites.
Well, let's hope the next 4 or 5 months turn out to be as successful as they are promising now. Robert, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure, Sean. Nice talking.
That was Robert Spurway, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of GrainCorp. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join me every morning for the full Fear and Greed podcast with all the business news you need to know. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.